If I am a landlord in King County and I need to evict someone and I start that process today, how long might I have to wait for that to be adjudicated?
No, it's going to take you a year. You
Wow.
won't get an initial hearing until at least February, probably March of 2025, and then
Wow.
several more months probably to get a resolution.
We've been working with the Rental Housing Association. We partnered with them to do a weekly segment to bring attention to these issues. Our guest today on the segment is someone who's actually trying to fix some of this nonsense. Again, a member of Team Sanity. It's King County Councilman Reagan Dunn, who sent out a couple letters to his colleagues with the council with some ideas to address these things. One, he wants an audit of the Housing Justice Project, which we've talked about. Also, in one of these letters, he talked about increasing funding to help with the eviction backlog, because right now the eviction backlog is insane, like it's pushing into 2025. So Councilman Reagan Dunn was nice enough to join us on the show today to talk about some of the problems, yes, but to talk about some of his ideas to turn things around. Reagan Dunn, welcome back to unDivided.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this conversation because we complain a lot about what's happening to landlords and some of the crazy policies and Housing Justice Project, but you're bringing solutions to the table. Let's see if your fellow council members are willing to accept such solutions, but we'll discuss that. So first, can we just get the Housing Justice Project thing out of the way for a second? Insane. I mean, it's insane that they would be using funds to write a $50,000 check for a guy who just has decided that he's not going to pay rent. So help me clear up one thing. How much of that is taxpayer money? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of it is. I mean, King County puts $16 million in every budget cycle to Housing Justice Project, and that's not the only money they get. They get a significant amount of money from the state as well. So when Housing Justice writes a big check for, in my opinion, a squatter, what you're doing is you're taking money that could be used for people who really need it. Let's think about the single mom with two children who really is, she lost a job, she had a medical bill that came up, unexpected expense. Somebody who sincerely needs the assistance and isn't gaming the system. And that's why the judgment is called into question with respect to the decisions made by Housing Justice Project, and then it causes all real concern.
Well, and it should be uncontroversial for that reason that you just articulated. I mean, I got on social media and I invited anyone of the sort of housing is a human right sentiment to come on and debate me on that, because you bring up a good point. How many people could you have helped down on their luck, renters, with $50,000? So you are proposing a couple things. One is an audit. And the other is to sort of put more rules in place, right, for Housing Justice Project. So walk us through your proposal.
Well, okay, with respect to Housing Justice Project, the first and most obvious is an audit. We can, as a granting agency, King County grants $16 million to Housing Justice. We set conditions on those grants, one of which is that money should be used for poor folks who are at what we call at or below 200% of the federal poverty line, which is like $61,000 for a family of four or less. And we're seeing that money go to somebody who reported $400,000 in annual income. And so the policies are clear from our end. Housing Justice has disputed that policy applies. I think an audit will clear that up and see to what extent other recipients in that wealthy class or multi-million dollar home, which is obviously not the kind of thing taxpayer money should be going to fund. What's been going on there? We really want to see that. And then with respect to Housing Justice, we want to take a good hard look at what the standards are going to be moving forward, so it's accomplishing our goal. Because that $16 million, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that help with housing support, and we could be putting that money to other nonprofits who are going to be putting it in the area that is most likely to help. Single mom, maybe a senior who's fallen on hard times with a medical bill, not people who are squatting or gaming the system. That's not where this should go. So if you're lying on applications, I don't believe you should receive the benefit of taxpayer subsidies. If you're honest, you've fallen on hard times, that's where the safety net should apply.
Yeah, you mentioned that phrase, gaming the system. I want to talk about that in a moment. But first, just on the audit, I'm assuming you can't call for an audit just on an island, right? So what kind of support, I mean, why wouldn't the King County Council and your colleagues on the council on the other side of the aisle agree with you that that's necessary?
Well, and they haven't said no yet.
Okay.
We hope the legislation gets heard. I know there's at least two other council members that have serious concerns. So I need 5 votes. I think I got around 3 so far. I'll keep working on it.
Okay.
The auditor, though, is an independent, professional, independent, we call it an independent office holder appointed by the King County Council. And the auditor, she could make a decision on her own to do it, or the executive could weigh in and suggest an audit as well. So I think there is a real possibility that an audit might happen. And there's nothing wrong with transparency. Let's find out what's what. So I hope that happens. But it also is a tool to help start community conversation like we're having now about how effective that whole regime has been in helping people who really need it.
Yeah, that would be really shocking and disappointing if they weren't willing to just take a closer look at this with all the red flags. So we want to know if that comes to a standstill, because we want to talk about that and point out that that would just be insane. And then on you mentioned gaming the system. The Housing Justice Project doesn't just cut checks to people. It also provides them with attorneys, for instance, if they're going through an eviction process. From the stories we've heard, Jason Roth in Seattle is a high profile one. It really seems like the Housing Justice Project gets in there and just tries to intentionally delay these things for as long as they can to keep people in housing. Would that fly in the face of what the county believes it's funding?
Yeah, I think if it's done in bad faith, it may well run afoul of the rules we put forward. I mean, look, if you sign a contract, a lease is a contract. You agree to pay money to lease a property. If you stop paying, you breach the lease. You're no longer entitled to be there. What most, I think, reasonable people do is if you get 5, 6, 7 months behind, it's getting out of reach. You can't get public assistance. What you do is you move out. You go find another place that's maybe it's a little farther away, but it's less.
Yeah.
What you don't do, and what I think this system's been encouraging it, is game the system by staying as long as you can, knowing there are legal delays, legal protections. There's a lot of reasons why that's not good. Here's one. The landlord, it might be a mom and pop landlord with 1 house or 2 houses, that's their sole income. They are on the hook for the taxes, for the mortgage, for the utilities, and it puts them underwater. And we have had cases here in King County recently where landlords file for bankruptcy. That's one. The other thing it does is it creates a substantial amount of money that renter will owe a judgment in court, and it's going to be additional back rent. And there's a bunch of other things, legal fees, et cetera. So it's in everybody's best interest to just move out. If you can't make it work, do the right thing, move out. But what Housing Justice is doing is the opposite, keeping them in as long as they can. And I think that's short-sighted because the resources being used for that, both in terms of legal fees, legal time, and the subsidies by the government, is taking much needed money away from the people who really need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And much like some of the COVID funds that just prop people up for too long and then they were left in a worse situation almost than when they started off. I don't think it helps the tenants ultimately either. So we're not saying don't help anybody. Reagan's not saying that. I'm not saying that. We're saying let's make sure that the money is helping people who really need it. That should be non-controversial.
Right.
I want to talk about the backlogs quick. I did not realize the extent. I knew it was bad. I did not realize the extent of the eviction backlog until you sent Nicole the details of it. In King County, it's insane. Can you characterize how bad it is for me?
Yeah, I mean, we used to have less than 500 cases, eviction cases processing at any one time, all in. Now we have 2,200, and that number is going up by almost 400 every month. There are 600 new cases filed for evictions every month. We can only process about a third to a quarter of those because of our capacity. And so what you have is this massive line around the block, a couple times around the block at the courthouse, for landlords to evict tenants. We've never seen like this, and there's a bunch of reasons for it. But one was the eviction moratorium that was passed by a lot of different jurisdictions. The other was that all of those subsidies dried up that was there for the pandemic. Another, of course, is the work by these nonprofits in some cases that actually artificially keep people in housing when they shouldn't. Uh, there's policies that are a problem too. Like, Seattle, you can't evict in the wintertime. You can't evict when kids are in school. In King County, unincorporated, you cannot demand a credit score of somebody who's applying to rent a unit. Well, I mean, of course you're going to have tenants that aren't going to end up being able to pay in some circumstances, and that's why evictions are necessary, which is why we have an eviction crisis. And so it's funny, right now, I want to do an audit of housing justice. I think it's important to focus on their work, but we need to increase the pipeline of the process where government honors contract and lease law where evictions happen. There's nobody better positioned, Brandi, than a court commissioner who's trained in these areas to determine whether somebody is legitimately a squatter, or is just a really bad tenant who's, breaking windows and breaking walls and doing illegal activity, or somebody who's only a couple months behind who's had a hard time that looks like they're going to catch up. Those commissioners can decide what's what and determine whether an eviction's appropriate. That's what we need to fund. That's where we need to put our resources. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny investment that's much needed in King County that will have profound effects throughout the rental housing stream.
Yeah, for that backlog and the commissioners, how many is there? I heard there's only three
That's
commissioners in for King County for all those backlog cases.
Yeah, and that's a little tricky part of state law, which says every county gets up to 3 commissioners for that. Well, when that law was written a century ago or whatever it was, I mean, King County is now a third of the state population. 46% of the economic activity and retail base is in King County. Obviously, we don't have enough bodies to process it. So Mark Mullet had a bill that was almost passed just a few months ago. It was killed for political reasons. But we'll be redoubling our effort with bipartisan support, and I expect we'll have that passed. So my job now is to get the money for more commissioners and staff. At the same time, we're dual tracking this legislative change, and so that early next year we can hire some more commissioners to get this process moving along.
Yeah. So let's end here. If I am a landlord in King County and I need to evict someone and I start that process today, how long might I have to wait for that to be adjudicated?
No, it's going to take you a year. Wow. You won't get an initial hearing until at least February, probably March of 2025, and then several more months probably to get a resolution. And again, that's 12 months that the landlord's on the hook for paying utilities, taxes, the mortgage, and it's another 12 months that tenant is getting farther and farther debt that they will ultimately have to satisfy when a landlord gets a judgment, garnishes their wages, attaches their property, or liens on their building. None of it is good. Everything is good when the process moves quicker, and it's not doing that.
How do we get here? I mean, I know that's kind of a rhetorical question, but this is an insane place to be to try to dig ourselves out of.
Well, let me just say something here, because these policies are all interrelated, all right? Washington State and King County has some of the most aggressive land use restrictions in terms of building housing. The regulatory climate in King County and Washington State, or what I call the regulatory overhang, makes it very, very expensive to build housing, and there's very little land we can build on. And so you have a shortage of supply. That's part of the problem. You've got all of these control systems that are put in place, eviction moratoriums, things like rent control, things like you can't increase the rent more than 7%. You have to give a 6-month warning. You can't check credit. All the things that people think they're doing good to help renters actually ends up reducing the amount of housing stock. When there's less stock, prices go up, and then we have this problem with not enough available housing. They're all interrelated, and it's unfortunate. And so I'm in a town hall the other day where a 25-year-old, college-educated, college degree, working. His wife, also 25, has a college degree, working. They're both working. And he asked me this question: Reagan, I'm playing by the rules. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I went to college. My wife went to college. We both have jobs, and we cannot afford to live in King County. What can we do? And the answer is, your elected leaders have failed you. That's what's happened here. They're failed policies that aren't working. We've got to turn it around. And so at least this is a start. we hope we can make progress here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you articulating how big the problem is, and it's coming from all angles. And like the story you mentioned, and I don't know how that 25-year-old votes, no idea, it doesn't matter. But when it comes to, there's one side of the aisle that talks about housing affordability and all of that, and I agree, we need to address that issue. But then they do things like try to restrict natural gas use, which what do you think that's going to do to the cost of a home? If a landlord has to go in and electrify their home for $40,000, you think they're going to eat that? Or do you think they're going to make it more expensive for the people who are renting that home? And so it's all that stuff that just doesn't compute to me. Like, oh, affordable housing crisis, like, let's make it more expensive. And I'm just sort of like, time out. So anyway, Reagan, thank you for being a voice of sanity and for working on solutions to these issues, not just complaining about it like we do on this show. So we appreciate you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brandi. I appreciate it.
Really common sense stuff here. That segment is brought to you by the Rental Housing Association of Washington, who we've teamed up with to do a weekly segment bringing these issues to the forefront. And heck, if you're a housing provider, a landlord, and you're not a member of RHA yet, you need to become a member of the Rental Housing Association of Washington. It's like $260 for an entire year, and they can help make sure that you avoid situations like some of the ones that we've highlighted on this show. So go check them out, rhawa.org.